The Busby Stoop Chair, the most dangerous piece of furniture in history. Thomas Busby was a career criminal and murderer who lived near the village of Thirsk in North Yorkshire in the late 17th century. He was also, by accounts of the time, deeply possessive, including about a particular chair in his favorite pub, which he considered his personal seat. According to the legend, Busby returned home one night to find his father-in-law, Daniel Audie, sitting in his chair. An argument ensued. In the early hours of the morning, Busby murdered Audie by beating him to death and burying his body in a field. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. On the morning of his execution by hanging in 1702, Thomas Busby was brought to the gallows at a crossroads near the pub. According to accounts written later, Busby was allowed to stop at the pub for a last drink. Before he left for the gallows, he stood and issued a curse. "May sudden death come to anyone who dares to sit in my chair." He was then hanged. His body was gibbeted, displayed in an iron cage at the crossroads, as was the custom for murderers. As a warning to others, the chair remained in the pub, and then, according to local legend, people who sat in it started dying. The early documented deaths attributed to the Busby chair span centuries and include some striking cases. A chimney sweep who sat in the chair in the 19th century reportedly died the same day. During World War II, Canadian airmen stationed in the area used the nearby pub and reportedly dared each other to sit in the chair. Several of those who did were killed in action shortly afterward. The pub landlord in the 1960s and 1970s reported multiple incidents of workmen, lorry drivers, and visitors who sat in the chair and subsequently died in accidents, sometimes within hours. The most striking documented case came in the 1970s. Two Royal Air Force pilots visited the pub and sat in the Busby chair despite being warned. They were killed in a crash shortly after leaving. A roofer who was working on the pub sat in the chair during a break and fell from the roof later that day. A delivery man sat in the chair against staff advice and crashed his truck on the way home, dying in the accident. After a string of these incidents, the pub landlord Tony Earnshaw decided he had enough evidence to act. He donated the chair to the Thirsk Museum with the specific instruction that it should never be sat in. The Thirsk Museum received the chair, and after at least one museum worker reportedly sat in it, and subsequently died in an accident, made the decision to hang it from the ceiling. The chair is now suspended from the museum ceiling at a height that prevents sitting. Visitors can see it, but cannot sit in it. The museum's curator has stated that they take the stories seriously enough not to want to test the hypothesis further. The chair has been examined by furniture historians who believe it is genuine 17th century craftsmanship, consistent with Busby's period. The skeptical analysis of the Busby chair deaths focuses on selection bias and confirmation bias. The chair was in a pub for centuries, where thousands of people sat in it. Of those who sat in it and died afterward, the deaths were noted and attributed to the curse. Of those who sat in it and did not die, no record was kept. These cases were simply forgotten. The deaths that are recorded occurred in populations with high baseline mortality: soldiers in wartime, construction workers with dangerous jobs, drivers on dangerous roads. The selective recording of deaths and non-recording of survivals is a classic confirmation bias scenario. Against the skeptical analysis, several specific cases are difficult to dismiss as random. The clustering of deaths in the 1960s and 1970s, multiple people dying within hours of sitting in the chair in different types of accidents, is statistically unusual, even accounting for baseline mortality. The pub landlord Tony Earnshaw was not a credulous person. He was a practical businessman who eventually concluded that the pattern was real enough to act on. His decision to donate the chair rather than continue exposing customers to a possible risk was made as a practical judgment, not a superstitious one. The Busby Stoop Chair hangs from the ceiling of the Thirsk Museum. It has been there since the 1970s. No one has sat in it since. This is a practical decision made by practical people who decided the deaths were statistically convincing enough to stop the experiment. Whether the chair is actually cursed, whether some mechanism we don't understand connects sitting in a 17th century murderer's chair to subsequent death, is a question science has not answered. Because science has not been allowed to test it, the experiment stopped, which may be exactly the right call.